So we're gonna pick up some of those things that we've talked about, but really look at it from the leadership perspective. So is there a different level of responsibility for leadership than there is for frontline individual contributors? Is it different?
I would say so.
How do you think it is, Mike?
People usually hold others in leadership positions to a higher standard.
Absolutely.
Face of the franchise.
Say it again.
Face of the franchise.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know how to say this without sounding really creepy, but it's the truth. They are watching you, first of all, right? So whatever you do becomes okay for them to do, even if it's against policy. And that's not true. But in their perception, well, if they're doing it, then, I mean, did I miss a job?
That was smooth, Chris.
You just got caught on camera.
Ooh, that
You
was
never know who your audience is.
right? Right. I did, because I heard and I saw you all. I knew there's
I
something
got a
right there.
funny story about that too.
So what was that?
So I got a funny story.
Oh, let's hear it.
No, it's really not funny. But we're having our safety meeting the other morning, you know, and some of us use foul language. I was sitting here with some drivers, you know, and I'm just talking, being me. And there's a guy sitting there and he goes, Craig's sitting back there in the back of the room, and I'm like,
Or chaplain.
you never
Oh,
know.
good.
You never know who your audience is, you know? He snuck in the back door on us, and we didn't even know he was in the room. He's our company chaplain, yeah. I was like, boy. Yeah.
But
He's
funny.
the police chaplain too, you're safe.
Okay.
You're not the first time he's heard it.
I
That's what I thought of whenever you said
Yes.
you never know your audience, because it just happened like,
Yes.
not too long ago.
The private school that I was telling you about, the CEO is a priest, and he swears more than I do. I
Really?
think. Yeah, which makes him relatable to me, and I have even more respect for him
Yeah.
because he's a person. But yeah, so you also can't make assumptions about your audience either. That could be equally risky. So leadership, is it different or is it the same? If there were the same level of responsibilities with leadership as there were with individual contributors or frontline employees, you would be gone, right? I would not have made you stay for this second hour. We gotta have a different conversation because your responsibilities, the perception, all of those things are different for leaders. So let's talk about this side first, and then we'll talk about a little bit of case law. So from the viewpoint of the law, you are the company. If you have leadership responsibilities, you are at the same responsibility level as that owner that was here this morning. The law does not differentiate between those two. You can be held personally liable for your actions as a leader of New Text Trucking. It can be small claims court, it can be a civil suit, it can be your money that someone goes after because of your leadership responsibility within the company. I know that sounds scary, and I'm okay with that mostly. This is such a big responsibility that I really want leaders to understand that it is, and that you really have to think at a different level before you say or do things. Does that make sense? Did you know that people could come after your money as a leader? Yeah, good. So no surprises there. So it's a big deal. There is case law that says, that kind of defines how we should move through claims or reports from employees. So this case law, which is Burlington Industries versus Ellerth, came out and said, so this pretty much becomes law, it said that for employers to have a good defense, if we do end up in court or mediation or any of those processes, for employers to have a good defense, they have to be able to prove that they did everything that they could to prevent harassment or discrimination. So what are some ways that you prevent here as a company or as a leader? What are some ways that you prevent harassment and discrimination?
These classes.
Absolutely. That's why I had you sign in, so that if anything happens, Ashley can say, oh, we did this. What else is prevention? your policy, your whole policy is prevention. Having people acknowledge that, read that, that is prevention as well. So it says that to have a good defense, you have to show that you did everything you could to prevent, and then you did everything that you could to correct promptly once they brought something to you. So what does prompt mean? Right now. Does it mean right now to everybody else?
Should, but
As
not
soon
always.
as possible.
As soon as possible. So if you got a long list of stuff to do, that can just maybe, after you get the list done.
No, prioritize it.
Okay,
Do that first.
okay, do it first, okay?
It's a vague term.
It's so vague. There's a completely different legal piece right now where they're looking at prompt. I can't remember what it is. But prompt is subjective. It's completely subjective. So I will make it not subjective, and I will tell you to address it right now. And we'll have examples that we go through. I don't care if it's a Sunday at 2 a.m., address it right now so that you can prove that you did, that you picked it up and did something with it right now. I've had people come in at the end of the day on Friday at 5:30 and say, can I talk to you about something? And I want to crawl under my desk. Yes. But it's already done. They did it. They showed up in your office and said the thing, and now you have to listen, and then you have to do something with it right now. That doesn't mean you have to go do the investigation right now, but you have to do something, document, go to HR, whatever that is, right now, not promptly, because that is so subjective. So back to the manager and leader, so you are considered the organization, you have a duty to report. So we talked about that your employees, we really want them to report, we encourage them to report. You have to report. You do not get the excuse of, well, those weren't my employees that I overheard talking about that. Or, talk about that in just a minute, an employee saying, don't tell anybody, but you don't get to do that. You don't get to use that excuse. You have a responsibility to report, and if we find out that you had information that you didn't handle properly, then the pretty big consequences with that. We'll talk about some of these others in just a minute. So what do you do? I just gave you a teaser. What do you do if an employee comes to you and says, I've got something I need to tell you, but you can't tell anybody? What do you say to that?
I usually say, I cannot make you that promise. If you tell me, it's possible I'm gonna have to do something with it.
Yes. Does anybody want them to tell you? I want them to tell me really bad. I maybe have done the, well, sit down, let's talk about it, without promising one way or the other. Don't do that, that's sneaky, don't do that. But I really want them to tell me, right? I want that information. But that is the fact. You cannot promise that. You can't, because what if they say it's a harassment claim that's needs to be investigated, and you've promised that? Now you're gonna have to undo that promise, or your job is gonna be in jeopardy if you keep it. So you can't promise the confidentiality. What if they tell you the thing and then say, but you're not gonna tell anybody, are you? Does that change it? They've already told you the thing. It doesn't change it. You still, what is it?
He said, we've had that.
Yeah.
We've had that.
A lot. I get more of the upfront. I think people are figuring out that they're supposed to preface with that. So I get a lot of people that come to me and say, I've got something I need to tell you, but you can't tell anybody. And that is really hard for me because I want to know the thing. But we can't make that promise. And it's almost harder after they've told you the thing to say, yeah, I gotta go tell people about this because it's a big deal. But it's, again, back to that supervisory responsibility. You can't promise it, and if you do, you might have to undo it. So what do you do if you learn about something they're not your direct reports, they're not in your area? Does that matter if they're not your people? It doesn't matter. So if you hear something, still the company, yes. Yeah, so my story on that, that was not awkward at all. My story on that, I had an investigation I was doing, and I had a supervisor that I interviewed through the investigation process. And I said, hey, he came in, I need to talk to you about this. And he was like, oh yeah, I know all about that. How do you know? Well, I heard people talking about it out on the shop floor. What'd you do? Not my people, not my business, just la la la. And I walked by. Is that the right thing? What should he have done?
I would think go to their supervisor first and then go to HR. Or, y'all get together, but probably bring their supervisor into it, aware of it, probably.
Yes, there are lots of different ways to handle that. Another one that you didn't mention, he's allowed right then to say, what are you all doing? Stop it. Stop talking about that. That's none of your business. He's allowed to do that, even though those aren't his people. He's absolutely allowed. And then the correct follow-up would be to either go to HR or go to their supervisor and let them know. I've corrected people that are not my direct reports because I'm a leader and that's what I'm supposed to do. But I always loop in their supervisors after to let them know what's happened. So what do you do if you're the one being investigated? And I always want to say who's been investigated, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Don't tell me. Don't tell
Well, I
me.
know something, but you can't tell anybody.
Right. Yes. Yes. So what if you find out that somebody has reported something on you and you're being investigated? What do you do? How do you handle that?
Keep
As a
your mouth
leader.
shut and don't treat that employee any differently.
Status quo. Say, unless status quo was you were treating them bad, then stop that. But if everything was above board, then you keep on keeping on. You're not going to go do your own investigation. You're not going to be nicer to them. It's just maintain until that's wrapped up. Because, back to my creepy statement at the beginning, they're watching you, right? That person is watching you. Now HR is watching you. Your boss might be watching you. So just status quo. That's a really uncomfortable place to be, but maintain. So what do you do if you're not sure? What do you do if somebody comes to you with something and you're not sure what to do with it, how to handle it, if it's valid, if it's not? What do you do with that? Say it again. Yeah.
Or previous deal, I will find out.
Yes. And then what do you do?
I tried all my best to find out.
Yeah. Great place to start.
Yes.
Yes, HR is a great place to start. I think if you're ever not sure, or even leaning a little bit on not sure, the correct response is, I'm not sure, but let me go find out, and then trot on over to HR and let them help you work through that. But we don't want to shut something down if it shouldn't be shut down, and it's not, sometimes, it's not always the role of the leader to do the investigation. Who does investigations here? So it's that HR. Maybe a supervisor sits in on them? Does that ever happen?
Gosh, it's been a long time since we've had to have one. Yeah. It's because they just don't tell me stuff. No, it depends. It depends on the scenario and the whole bit.
Okay. So that validates my point. Not always your role to do the investigation, but it is your role to pass that on promptly or right now. And if you go to HR and they say, no, that's not valid for this reason, then you know, and you can go back and you've got an answer for them. So leadership responsibilities, know your policy. We talked about that. You all know where to find it. You don't have to have it memorized, but you have to be able to reference it if you need to. Act and take every complaint seriously. We talked about promptly. It's right now. Take every complaint seriously. Have you ever had anybody bring you a complaint and you thought, really? That's what's keeping you up at night? Am I the only jerk that's thought that? But did this show it? Nope. Did I say, really? Nope. I took it seriously and I went and did what I was supposed to do with that. And sometimes uncovered something bigger that I didn't think I was going to uncover. But it goes back to what I said almost 2 hours ago. If somebody is not comfortable at work, I'm not the judger of that. That's not my barometer. it's theirs. And I want people to come to work and be comfortable so that they can do their job, so that they can do the work that we're paying them to do. Protect confidentiality. This, like we just talked about, does not mean that you have to keep everything confidential, but there are times, like in the COVID situation that I shared with you earlier, where you don't have to. You don't have to share names. And I bet your people sometimes share personal information, dare I say drama, with you. Is that accurate? Any of you ever feel like counselors? Yeah, like you should have a couch in your office. We don't need to share that. They're sharing that with us in confidence, and if it doesn't impact their work or their job, we can, again, back to dignity and respect, keep that information confidential. This is back to ACT. This becomes priority number one. If somebody brings something to you, it goes to the top of your list. It is number one. It's the first thing that you do. And again, that doesn't mean we're gonna drop everything and do the entire investigation, but it does mean you've gotta hand it off. You've gotta hand it off properly. And then we lead by example because they're watching you. You ready to practice? This is the fun part. And I've given you a lot of these answers, and we're still gonna end on time. Okay, so at an after-hours event on a Friday evening, an employee approaches you and reports a harassment claim. So let's say it's not a company-sponsored event. You're just hanging out with some people at the brew and
Bless Brew, yeah, the
Bless
coffee
Brew,
shop.
just hanging out there, Ernie.
We just came from the walking meeting though, okay?
That makes more sense. He's trying to sober up before
We're
he
trying to
takes
get a
it.
Got
cup
it,
of
that's,
coffee.
get some coffee,
Yeah.
yeah. So you're hanging out with some people, you're a leader, we're leaders in this room, and somebody comes up to you, it's a Friday evening, do you work Monday through Friday? Are you
Sometimes.
supposed to work Monday through Friday?
Yeah.
Right, that's the normal shift. So Friday evening, you're hanging out having a good time, somebody comes up to you and reports a harassment claim.
An employee.
Yes, an employee. Maybe you're an employee, maybe not, but we know that it's a frontline worker reporting something to you as a leader. So do you immediately pull them aside and begin documenting their account of the harassment? Do you tell them it'll be looked into first thing Monday morning, make a note to go see your manager on Monday? Or do you call your manager right now? So this is for discussion. Doesn't have to be perfect. But somebody's gonna have to answer.
Our guys are usually really good about calling me immediately, and then we normally deal with it on Monday morning.
But I think you would wanna get on the side from everybody else.
Okay.
Start the documentation
Okay, so you think you would wanna get them aside?
with everybody,
What would you be documenting?
everything that they want, everything they say.
So kind of their story, okay?
That way when you call Ashley or whatever, you can have their facts the way they say it.
Okay,
In fact, you might even want to record it
okay,
and stuff, and that way for future reference. And then we'll start looking into it.
okay.
Then,
So that was pull them aside, capture kind of the details of the story, maybe even record it, and then pass that information off to Ashley. When do you pass that information off to Ashley?
as soon as I'm done talking to them.
Okay, right then, as soon as you're finished talking to him. Mike, Ernie, what do you think about that?
All of the above type deal, then, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, that's not, D is not up there, is it?
No,
That's why
what's
you're-
throwing me off.
You're gonna get more angry with me as the questions go on, because it is kind of a hodgepodge. I want us to talk about these. And it depends on, this is the variable I now introduce. What if you've been drinking? What if
That
you've
was
been
my
drinking?
next question. Are drinks involved in this after-hour event? So I'm pretty sure I'm drinking after hours.
That's why the whole deal of recording,
Okay,
it might help.
so for you, Ernie, does that change it? If you've been drinking, does it change, or is it still all of the above?
Well, it's still all of the above. It's more immediately gonna probably call because I have been drinking.
Yeah.
If I were drinking in this situation.
Right, hypothetically,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
We think
probably
maybe-
gonna skip talking to them at all and say, let's get with HR.
Okay,
At that point.
okay. You got anything to add, Mike, or you think?
No, not really. That's what I would think, is try to document what you can in the moment, and then, make sure as soon as you can that you discuss it with your supervisor or HR department. Try to make sure things get the ball rolling,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah, lots of variables that could be at play here. So it could be, it depends. But I think the important thing is that whether you've been drinking or not, whether they have been or not, the setting, the variables, you gotta tell somebody right now. So this alone is not good enough. Just this, just making a note to yourself, and this is my opinion, but just making a note to yourself and saying, we'll get with you on Monday is not enough, and then not doing anything until Monday.
That's kind of what I was saying, because they might be the ones that are drinking, and they wouldn't have said it to you if they weren't drinking, so Monday they might not want to talk about it, or
Yeah.
something, you know what I'm saying?
I do, and I've had people bring that up before, and they still might not want to talk about it on Monday.
Right.
But at least I've done my part
Yeah.
of giving it to Ashley, and she started doing her process, and we're all ready on
Because
Monday.
if they come in there Monday morning and say, never mind, I wanna drop it, we got it noted and everything for future if possible.
Yes. We maybe even have enough details that we could go investigate it.
You know,
So-
it's still investigated at that point, right?
Let's rabbit trail into that, because I've had managers ask me, let me give you this scenario. I had a manager ask me in a training a couple of weeks ago, she said, I have seen behavior recently from one of my employees to the other that I was not comfortable with. I approached the employee on the receiving end and said, I saw this, are you okay? And that employee said, oh yeah, that's just part of our relationship, that's fine. So the manager said, everything's okay. So I just dropped that and didn't do anything with it. Is that the right thing? If the employee that's receiving the behavior is okay with it,
Well, no, because they could wake up in that different world tomorrow, like we talked about earlier, and not be okay one day.
Or there's another employee that sees it and makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, I mean, the supervisors already saw it, and they're uncomfortable with it, so.
yes. Yes, so we got to dive into that in the training in front of all of their peers. But with that kind of scenario in mind, taking it back to the employee now says, never mind, I was emotional, everything's okay, it's too late, the cat's out of the bag. So we don't get to not investigate because they don't want us to anymore. It's gonna make the investigation harder, probably, I've had that happen, but we have information documented that we know about, and just come from a moral compass standpoint, I'm not gonna let that drop. We're gonna go do something about it until there's nothing else to do.
Well, because if the employee who's changed their mind changes their mind again, and you haven't done anything about it, then as an employer, you're in a pretty bad position.
Yes. Yes, yeah, it's the right thing to do, but the next happy hour, it might come up again, yeah. Okay, so you overhear several employees discussing a current sexual harassment investigation that is ongoing. I gave you this answer. Do you stop what you're doing and explain that they should not be discussing an ongoing investigation? Do you do nothing because they're not your direct reports, so that's not your responsibility? Or do you stop what you're doing and explain that they should not be gossiping?
Hey,
A, okay?
stop what you're doing and explain.
It's
what
not
you should
B.
discuss.
Good job, yes. It is not B. So what's the difference between these two?
Yeah, what is the difference?
So this one is confirming that there's an ongoing investigation, and this one is not. So you think gossiping?
Yeah, because do you wanna confirm that there's an ongoing investigation? If they don't know, they're just thinking there is?
Right. And they might not even be thinking. that there is.
Right.
They might just be gossiping about the situation that they saw happen. So that's the reason why it's not A. At first, that's none of their business. And second, we don't want to confirm that. But that doesn't mean that they get to chit-chat about it out and about with each other. So we still have a responsibility, even if they're not our people, to shut that down.
So what if the person that made the complaint is thinking, oh, okay, well, now they're calling it gossip, this is a non-investigation. Could they be offended by that?
Of course they could, because anybody in America can be offended by anything. Of course they could. I would be able to explain that, though, that I have a responsibility to protect that level of confidentiality. And that is not a need to know, right? Those people out gossiping about it aren't in a need to know place about the investigation. Now, this is what I thought you were gonna say. If the person that complained or the person that's being investigated is talking about it, telling people their firsthand experience, is that okay?
No. I wouldn't think so.
So oh gosh, I'm sorry about this rabbit trail, but we're gonna go. So there's a piece of the law that usually applies to union activity, but there's a kind of a carve out. It's Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act. I don't expect you to, that's not on the quiz, by the way. I heard myself, it sounded so nerdy, sorry about that. So that law says that all organizations, even non-union organizations, have to allow concerted activity, protected activity. And some of those activities that employees are allowed to talk about are things like their pay. So they're allowed to talk amongst themselves about how much they make, how much you make. Is that different? Is that okay? I don't feel like that's good. They're allowed to talk about their work environment. And we're flirting with the line if we mandate employees in an investigation keep that confidential. So it's risky, and from my standpoint, I'm open, Ashley, if you know something different. It's risky to say in the investigation, but even though I want to, okay, this is confidential, don't talk about this. That's what I want to say. But that could be flirting with their concerted activity rights. Did that make sense?
But you feel comfortable saying that to the manager that's being investigated, yes?
I do because it's a different responsibility. And I need to confirm that. I'm not sure if managers are included in the concerted activity. I don't think they are. Yeah. So, but we know your people are. So if we're investigating somebody, we have time for a story. So this is a doozy. It packs a bunch of information all in one story. So I had a lady come to me and said, hey, I've got something to report. I was propositioned by this guy in the back parking lot yesterday. He said, if it's quid pro quo, if I gave him pictures, he would give me money. And I said, okay, well, so we started the investigation immediately because she was there to report it. So my first question was, who were your witnesses? Who saw this? Nobody saw it. That's I think, probably one of the hardest things for an investigator to hear is nobody saw it, because it's gonna be really hard to prove this one way or the other if he denies it. So I started the investigation. I came in on a Saturday to continue talking to people that she told me I could talk to, and this is where it kind of takes a turn. I had someone else, a completely separate employee, come in and she said, hey, I heard you were investigating this lady. And I said, yeah, and she said, I heard you were investigating her claim. She said, you need to be investigating her. Come in, sit down, tell me all about that. So she said that she was the one actually harassing men out on the shop floor. This was another manufacturing company. Her report was that she talked about her sex life a lot and asked other people about theirs. She physically harassed some of the men. That's what she did. She would wrap their legs around them and bring them into her while she was seated. So this was her report. That was all corroborated. Here's why I started to tell you this story. I did ask that lady, the one that brought it to me that I ended up investigating, I said, hey, just think about as you go out and carry on with your business, that maybe we don't want this to be public knowledge. So I flirted with that line. I didn't say don't talk about it, but I said it's gonna be really hard for you and for this other party and just to do the investigation. So maybe we don't. Well, she shared it in a private Facebook group that somebody's brother's dad's was also a member of. So like wildfire the next, everybody knew about it, right? So even if we say don't, they can, right? And that does make it harder. But she ended up, by the way, side note, she ended up getting fired because that was all very much corroborated and there were no witnesses for her report about him propositioning. That was probably one of my most interesting, and that was my first female sexual harassment. So let's keep going. Let's do a couple more and then I'll let you go. So, no, we talked about that one. An employee, not your direct report, just a frontline employee, approaches you at the end of the shift and asks if they can talk to you in your office. Once you're in the office, they ask for advice on how to handle an uncomfortable situation with a coworker who touches them often. So, not your employee, but they come to you for advice. What do? Ask them for more details and then report it? Do you encourage them to address it with the person, or do you take it straight to HR?
Straight to HR.
Is that the right answer, Ashley?
Well, based on what you said previously, we would encourage them to address it with the employee if they feel comfortable and then report it to HR.
So don't throw anything at me. It can be all of the above. It can be all of them, depending on why they came to you. First of all, let's dig into that a little bit. So what if their coworker is actually their boss? So I've had somebody say in this situation, really they need to go to their boss. So we can walk over with them we can walk them to their boss, which I've done that before. Have you talked to your boss about it? No, I haven't. Why not? Oh, I just haven't found him. Oh, let's go. Let's both go, because it's alive now, right? We're talking about it, we're comfortable right now, so let's both go talk about it. That's an option. If it is the boss, obviously we're not gonna walk them to the boss. If the boss is the one making them feel uncomfortable. But yes, one of the questions is, have you talked to them about it? And if they say no, then you can say, why not? And if they say, I'm not comfortable, then that's the end of that, right? If they say, I just haven't had the words in the moment, then you can have that interactive discussion. But no matter what you do, at the end of it, you do this. No matter what kind of conversation you have with them or what action you take, you document. We didn't talk about documenting, but you document that conversation, I would say electronically to Ashley, so that it's there forever.
And our guys are really good about calling, and then I'm like, hey, could you send it to me in an email? And there's a heavy sigh, and then they do it.
Yes, because calling is so much easier. Let me just give you these words, and then
Well,
it's,
and easy to ask questions and all of that and how to get a feel, but then I need to be able to have it written to put in a file.
yes. So that if somebody sues somebody, it's there, because it's there forever. Not just if that file gets destroyed, it's still there. Somehow we can pull that back up. So what do you document? I don't have a slide on this. I do in other presentations, but not this one. What do you document when you send an email to Ashley?
Facts.
What they say, who, what, where, when, how, them.
Yes. No opinions.
Time,
Yes.
where it happened.
Yes. Perfect. It's what you said at first was it. The facts. We don't document our opinions or our perceptions or what we thought. We don't fill in gaps. I love quotes. So if they say something that you're like, oh, that's really important, then write it down with quotes and put that in the documentation that you send. Because they said it. They said it, and it's fact-based. It's not your opinions. We don't say, he seemed really mad, or he was cranky about this. Those are our opinions and our perceptions. Several coworkers are having a 50th birthday party for your boss. They ask you to pick up some gag gifts for the party. We didn't talk about this protected class very much. So we want you to get some gag gifts for a 50th birthday party for your boss. What do? Do you ask for clarification on what they mean by gag gifts? Do you go ahead and do it? Mostly harmless gag gifts. Black balloons, depends, those kinds of things. Or do you tell them, no, your boss or others could be offended by the insinuation? Let's talk about what the answer is, and then we can talk about what you really do.
The correct answer is C,
It is. Yes.
and it makes me roll my eyes.
C does?
Yes.
Because you want to be able to do this.
Because if you know the person, right, if you have an agreement that you can do that, well, it's the others that could be offended that's tricky, right?
Yes.
Did we just have black balloons?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Yes. We'll just delete that off then. Yes. So it is others, and it's also, we can't ever forget about the fact that they can change their mind. I see this. I have seen this, and I was the fun shutter downer. I got to go in and be like, guys, we can't do this. Gotta put all this away. But I see this, especially you're hearing now that I have a pretty strong manufacturing background. So lots of guys that have been around forever that we've slowly started to call Gramps, and I had a Pop and Papa, all of those, right? What's his name? Jim. Could we call him that and not Gramps? Because Jim gets to decide, he gets to have that overnight experience and wake up and decide that he's offended. Or this is really what happens. Jim gets fired for poor performance, and then he sues us for age discrimination because his supervisor called him Pop Pop, right? And that's pretty hard to argue with. So that's why we don't, this person might be completely okay with the depends and the black balloons, but if they get fired 2 weeks later, then they can come back with their pictures and say, they fired me because I'm old and they've been discriminating against me, see these balloons and depends. And that's not our intent, right? That's never the intent, but our intent doesn't matter in court. I feel like I'm shutting the fun down right now. Okay, one more. Yeah, this is a good one. 2 of your direct reports are in a known relationship. So you have 2 people that work for you and they're in a relationship and everybody knows about it. Out of the blue one day, one of them approaches you and says that the other party has been sexually harassing them. So you're a little bit confused because last you knew they were in a known sexual relationship, and then somebody comes to you and says, this other party has been sexually harassing me. Do you report it immediately? Do you take the time to explain to them the perils of being in a relationship with someone that you work with? Which this is what I want to do, by the way. Don't be in a relationship with people that you work with. Or after you learn that they're still together but in a fight, you tell them that sexual harassment is not relevant in this situation.
Hey, do that.
We can't do to report a problem.
Yeah, it's gotta be A. If we want it to be B or C, but it's gotta be A. We can't do this because we don't know, and it's not our place to immediately assume that there has been no sexual harassment just because they're in a fight but still in a relationship. That's not our role. That's not even Ashley's role. Ashley still has to go investigate it if she gets a complaint of sexual harassment, regardless. Do you all have a relationship policy or a dating in the workplace policy?
We do.
You do.
It's very vague, but we do.
What does it say?
It says that you cannot be in a relationship with a direct supervisor or direct chain of command. It does not address employee-to-employee
Okay.
relationships.
That's pretty standard. I do a lot of handbooks, and I see that it is usually in those reporting lines. And I think you should absolutely have that in your policy, because think about what that looks like. If somebody that you're dating reports to you, it's just not gonna go well. It doesn't matter how you're treating that person, the perception of it's just not gonna go well. And then if you break up, because I have seen that. So around the Me Too movement, there were some organizations that started to put what they call consensual relationship policies or dating in the workplace policies in place. And I worked for one of them, and their policy said, you have a responsibility to come tell us when you enter into a new relationship with someone at work, and you're gonna sign this form, and the form says that you're gonna hold us harmless. So when it goes wrong, we're out. We are not responsible for what happens. And I honestly don't know how that would hold up in court, but they did it. And people reluctantly came forward and signed it because they were scared. Okay, so we don't have time. I'm gonna make time. I'm gonna do this really quick because we've talked about concerted activity, and concerted activity a lot of times happens on social media. So that, especially with COVID, that I don't feel comfortable at work or outside of COVID. My boss is a jerk. My work culture is not good. I don't like it there. I'm uncomfortable. I don't make very much. Those conversations are allowed to happen, and they're allowed to happen, unfortunately, on social media. That doesn't mean that if you see it, you just leave it alone. That's back to those spidey senses. If you see it, screenshot it and go to Ashley. And because there are still things that we can say to them without completely saying stop that concerted activity. This is what I really want to emphasize. As a leader, continuing to scroll if you see something that's not above board is not, if you see it, it happened, and you've got to do something with it. Specifically, I can't remember if your harassment policy talks about, no, your social media policy talks about unlawful harassment and discrimination in social media. So if you see that and you don't do anything with it, you can be held responsible for that. And definitely, if you like something that's questionable or share it or comment on it, any of those things, you can be held responsible for that. So even though it would be hard to prove that you saw something, if it's found out that you didn't do anything with it, you're responsible for that. Who's connected on social media with people that report to them? And how's that work? Do you ever see anything that's like a, oh, yeah.
I mean, really, there's nothing ever set up for them. So, other than maybe like to our own little bill of hiring, for hiring for a mechanic or something like that. They may share it out
Yep.
and stuff, but there's nothing.
That's the
there's
best
nothing
kind.
of any kind of
Good.
what work is and stuff. Now, when we had, bonuses back at BTT, there was a couple of guys that were posted about, hey, it's a good place to work, to get a good bonus and all that stuff, so.
That's good
But
posting.
nothing negative. I've never seen nothing negative.
Okay.
So,
Good.
okay.
Yes, yes. So I'm not here to tell you to not be friends or not be connected with people on social media or to be. I haven't. I purposely do not do this because I don't want to know. It's self-protective. I don't want to know who you voted for or what your political beliefs are, or I don't want to know that you partied it up last night. And then when I see you today, I'm like, oh, are you moving a little slow today? I just don't want to know that. That's why I'm not connected to people on social media. But you're allowed to. I just want to make sure that if you are, you understand that that still comes along with the responsibility as the leader. Okay, that's it. What questions do you have? Have you heard every single bit of this before? Did anybody get a new nugget, a new piece of information that you can take away?
The gender deal.
Good.
With the guy and the lady, I never really heard anything like that. So that had me thrown on where she had to go get dressed at.
Right.
And
me too. And I need thrown too.
That's a good deal of, that's separate bathrooms and stalls, go to mine.
Yeah, I had, in this training, I had someone say, from a very strong belief standpoint, I don't care what the law is, I'm going to tell her to use the bathroom that matches her biology. And I said, you can absolutely do that. I'm not here to tell you all what to do and what not to do. But you can also get sued, personally. So if you make that choice based off of your personal belief system and not the law, and not in advice with Ashley, you can get sued. So we can all, even though we're leaders, this is really advice based on the law. But I also want you to know the consequences that can happen as well. That person did not like that I said that to them. And they had never encountered that, said that as soon as they did, they would let them know what bathroom to use, which is the one associated with her biology. Which, by the way, that's also tricky, because if we go back to my employee, she was transitioning, so I don't know what her biology was at any point, and that's not my business to ask.
Well, there's only one way to check that for
Yeah,
sure.
not
That's
gonna.
not okay at the
Nope.
workplace.
Nope. Nope.
I'm not checking.
Good. Yeah, in those situations, it can almost become a medical situation or a disability because of the medical treatment that's involved, and it's a whole other thing as well. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.
I appreciate your time. Appreciate you staying. Nobody slept in this dark, warm room.